One of the big questions people have is regarding God and decisions like, I'm a good person. You either get to go to heaven or you don't. Well, what about all the people that didn't have a chance to hear the good news? And so what about those people? And I truly believe that we all go through the same decision tree, right? You either think there's something above you that you're accountable to, or you don't.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Biblical Money. I am Rabbi Rami Goldberg. I am here with Rob Brinkman, who is a board member and CEO at VHQ, where they do a number of different modeling and 3D modeling, and we'll have you tell us a bit more about that. But before we want to start, I wanted to start off with, I think one thing that's unique, and I was looking, and why you're really one of the ideal people that I love to have on this podcast. I was looking at your LinkedIn. You open up your LinkedIn about you. I am a man of faith, a devout father, devout husband, and father. And a lot of times people don't wear their faith on their sleeve. They talk about, hey, I'm an entrepreneur, and you have all that nice, good stuff next. But that's really where you start. So tell us a bit about your faith and how you kind of see that as being part of LinkedIn, and has that ever been a problem for you? I guess on the flip side.
Yeah, well, it's interesting starting from the problem side. So a group of us built a pretty substantial investment insurance company and sold it to one of the major firms on Wall Street for a little over $1 billion. And so I was one of those fortunate, corner office guys that the younger people would come in and ask advice, and most of it was career advice. But I would always ask them, I'm happy to give you some insight. Do you want my professional opinion or my personal opinion? And invariably they would say both. So I would always answer with the professional side first, because you got to cover human resource issues, right? You don't want to get in trouble there.
CYA, baby, CYA.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah. And so then I would go into the personal side, and most people, unless they grew up with a family, and more specifically some faith organization that talked about exercising their faith in business, most people, they just don't think of it that way. And I was fortunate to have some really strong mentors that motivate me to be intentional with my faith, because at the end of the day, is that too dark?
Yeah, it was better before, but whatever, You're still okay.
At the end of the day, everything we have belongs to God, right? And so you can choose to honor Him or honor yourself. And I, like a lot of successful professionals, go through that phase of thinking they're the smartest person in the room, and whenever there's a success, you want to, reach over and pat yourself on the back and think it was your efforts or your intellect. But I learned early on that if I'm gonna believe in God and be faithful in my personal life, then why should I cordon off the business side? Why should I punch the clock at 8:00 on Monday, get into the office, and just start doing everything on my own and not include God? And that just didn't make a lot of sense to me. And so I found that the more I communicate with God in my business, the more He answers, and the more He's active in decisions. Now, what's interesting, and we run into this in all aspects of prayer, right? You're trying to make a decision. It's really nice if you wake up and there's a note on your pillow, go this direction or go that direction. But God doesn't always do that. And certainly there's times where He makes it obvious one way or the other, but there's so many times, how many decisions we have in a day where we'd like a little more clarity, and it's not. And one thing that I have come to be comfortable with is that if I bring something to the Lord first and am sincere about His input, and even if I don't have this blinking light, green or red, He will honor my decision, because He does give me the ability to make good, sound business decisions. And so, I'm sure there are times where I've made a decision in business that I probably could have gone the other way, and it may have had a better result. But regardless of my decision, I believe that God will honor my decision, because I was sincere in bringing it to him in the first place, if that makes sense to you.
100%. I mean, I think about like a parent, right? Meaning we tell our kids, you make that decision on this one, right? Meaning it's your decision, and we know which way we want them to go, but we are going to support them, and we're going to let them sometimes make that mistake, because that's also how you learn, right? I mean, if you don't get onto that bicycle and scrape your knee, then you're not going to learn. But yeah, that 100% makes sense to bring God into that. So what was it that started you off? You said you had a really solid foundation. Was your parents, your schooling? Like where did you come to that?
I grew up in a pretty orthodox religion, but I remember when I was 15, my dad came to me and said, "Hey, you don't need to go to church if you don't want to." And I remember at that time thinking, okay, I'm not really getting a lot out of it, but when I get married and have kids, I'll start going to church because I think that's important. Now, why I thought that at the age of 15 is beyond me, because I wasn't that cerebral at that point. Certainly not spiritually cerebral. But later on in life, I just, people started sharing their faith with me, and I realized that there was something bigger, right? And I think that, one of the big questions people have is regarding God and decisions like, well, I'm a good person. You either get to go to heaven or you don't. Well, what about all the people that didn't have a chance to hear the good news? And so what about those people? And I truly believe that we all go through the same decision tree, right? You either think there's something above you that you're accountable to, or you don't. And if you don't think there's anything accountable to you, then no matter how much God tries to reach into your life, it's just going to be Teflon. But for me, I just started, God started pressing my heart that there is something bigger than me, and this is one of those things that people, when you go through all the different celebrations, all the faith celebrations, right, Hanukkah or Christmas or whatever it is, everybody loves those because that's all the gift giving and everything's joy and happiness, and they love receiving that stuff. But it's the other type of commitments where God holds you accountable that most people are not comfortable with, right? And they don't want to be held accountable. And so for me, I actually just had this bent toward realizing I don't know all the answers. There's something bigger than me. So how do I reconcile that? Well, for me, God reconciled that through his provision. I'm a Christian. I believe that Christ is the Messiah, and that's how that provision happened for me. And so that's what moved me into that process of a relationship, a one-on-one with God. Because that's the thing that, you go all the way back into Genesis. I don't get lost on the fact that God is a relationship God, right? And he created Adam and Eve for relationship. And he didn't create robots, right? He didn't create these, you do this and do that and tell me you love me. He wanted interaction. He wanted dialogue. He wanted discord. And if he did it back then, he's still doing it today. And to me, that's a spectacular notion that the God that created the universe actually wants to have an intimate relationship with me. And so I was fortunate to be wise enough to apply that in my business as well as my marriage and my kids and so forth. So,
yeah, I mean, it's just, I love that in terms of God's relationship. If you look throughout the Bible, so often people are actually wrestling with God. They speak back to him. Like it's you want to talk about a relationship is not just like, okay, you tell me and I'm going to do. And they actually fight back. Like God says, okay, I'm going to destroy, Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham says, no, you're not. How are you going to do that? Maybe there's 50 righteous, maybe. And he's struggling. You have Jonah who says, God, what are you doing? Right? An amazing thing. And this is where actually Hebrew becomes really, really important. Jonah, his father, he's called Jonah, the son of Amittai. The word Amittai, the name comes from the word emet, which means truth. That he was fighting God in a truth, like this is law as opposed to compassion, right? Where God is kind of coming at him. And so Jonah is actually fighting with God saying, no, the truth is these people deserve to be wiped off and destroyed. And God kind of turns to Jonah and says, were you here when I, created everything? So just keep quiet. Otherwise otherwise you're going to be finished. Right. So that's, but I think that, business is kind of like, there's only kind of it's so extreme. It's either this feeling of like, it's all me or it's all God. Like there's none of this, like, and if the all me obviously doesn't make sense, because we know how often you are working on this business deal and you're trying and trying and trying. And ultimately the money actually comes from a different thing, because the guy calls you up and he's like, oh, you remember we met at, at the movie theaters or whatever it is. So I think that's amazing. And it's amazing to, kind of bring it into your company. So you've had a lot of people that you've managed over the years. I mean, that's general, that's been so give me a little bit about your professional background and kind of moving up the charts.
Yeah. So I played tennis in college, and when that was done, I had to get a real job, and, I'm good with numbers, good with math. And so I have a pretty outgoing personality, meaning that I like the challenge of meeting people and having dialogue with them. And most people look at a quote salesperson that has the gift for gab and say, wow, that person's a natural salesperson, right? And I realized that selling is actually, there's a lot of discipline to it as much as the art. And so I was fortunate to have some mentors that really helped me understand the techniques of selling, right? How to use words and how to wait on words. And so I had a lot of success selling early on, mainly in the Wall Street arena. But then as I continued to have success, people above me were recognizing that I had certain leadership abilities, and I didn't know I had them either. I was just a kid that could hit a tennis ball, right? So as I kept getting
not a team sport, right?
Yeah, well, it's exactly, that's a very good point. And so the things I'm passionate about now is golf, again, another individual sport, and it's one of those things that selling fit my DNA. I could go out and make things happen. But I also had this desire to see other people have success that were struggling. And so by coaching them and mentoring them in certain ways, specifically in selling, was very energizing for me. And so when you're in a big organization that is in need of sales management, if you will, then they identify that pretty quickly and start moving you up. And then as that responsibility grew and I just kept rising in the company, I was running in the inner circles, and then all of a sudden I realized that I have an executive management DNA again that I didn't know I had. And a lot of it is, people talk about your intelligence, your IQ. I just happen to have a pretty high EQ. I have a high emotional quotient. Some of it is probably from selling, right? In selling, you're told no all the time, and I mean you could just crumble when somebody says no, or you just kind of move on and go to the next thing, right? So when you get up into the upper sphere of executive management, you have a lot of things that you have to juggle, and you can't fall to pieces whenever things don't go well. And so I excelled there. And again, people in a big organization, they identify and they just keep moving you up. So for me, that's really was what reached me to the top of my business career. And then when we sold the company, then I was able to start taking a lot of the stuff I learned, both from selling and leading and managing, and then applying it to smaller business. Because again, when you look at the typical small business owner, I mean, so the company we built, we had, at our peak, we had 1,400 employees before we sold. You have that many people, you have some really smart executives that are paid a lot of money that have, MBA backgrounds, and, they are your operating system. They know everything to do. But you go to a small entrepreneur, they don't have access to that stuff, and unless they're a reader, unless they're going to read books, then they're really kind of, they have a talent, they have a penchant for doing something well, and they may be able to, bring clients in the door, bring revenue in the door, but there's a lot more to operating a business than just generating revenue, right? Or it's the opposite, where they have a really good widget, they have a good idea, but they couldn't sell their way out of a wet paper bag, right? So for me, it was taking a lot of this experience that I was fortunate enough to be exposed to, and started working with smaller companies and doing more entrepreneurial things. And it led back to my original energizing component of helping someone who was not doing well in sales, coaching them in that regard and seeing their success. And then, the company attained higher levels of success because of what their efforts were doing. And I just started applying that to smaller entrepreneurial businesses. And it's been a lot of fun. I continue to do that. I mean, the company that I'm running now, it's the same thing, that you see all these little nuances that the average person would not understand why it's happening or how to proceed. And because I have some experience in doing that, I'm able to navigate the waters.
Yeah, no, it's definitely fun. I had a young entrepreneur call me yesterday, and also he had all these ideas, and he was like, "Okay, at what point do I bring in investors?" I was like, slow down, buddy. Like there's so many more things you need to work on the business plan and make sure that you don't run out of capital and all of those things. Where a young, this is a young kid who, a young married man. I shouldn't say kid; he's a little older than that. But I was just like, it's someone who could easily run out of money because he's so excited about what he's doing and doesn't have that discipline that's there. One challenge that we've seen rising, this goes back already probably the last 30 or 40 years within Hollywood, is anytime you watch a movie, and within about 5 minutes, that it's going to be the CEO because he just is greedy and wants more. How do you respond to that? What you've seen some large companies, you've dealt with some amazing people, and I'm sure some less amazing people. But how do you put these two not together? But when you look at the people that you've met, are they mostly good people, or mostly they're really just trying to get ahead and they'll do anything they can to get there?
Yeah, it's difficult to paint a broad brush because there are so many different people, right? And one of the things I've learned is that I measure other people by their actions, but I measure myself by my intentions, right? So it's difficult to determine where, what's the real motivating factor for someone. I will tell you that a buddy of mine who runs a pretty large financial firm in New York, whenever it's a new relationship, a new business connectivity, his motto is he tries to give that person the chance to screw him over as quickly as possible, so he knows. And if he doesn't, then he knows he's got a solid relationship. But if it's not, then he didn't invest a lot of time, money, and effort into it. And so one of the things that there's more and more faith-based business mentoring groups out there. And, I was involved with one for quite some time called C12. And I mention it because I love their mission statement. And their mission statement is great business, greater purpose. So it's like, okay, so you're successful, you're making a lot of money. That's great. But how are you impacting God's kingdom? And I think that that's ultimately one of the things that we really have to sit back and ask ourselves of why we're running a business. Yes, especially, I'm a big fan of the man being the priest in the home, right? And, that they are responsible for a lot of things in their home. And making money, providing for the family is at the very top. So that's important, right? You have to pay the mortgage and put food on the table and educate your kids. But beyond that, because look, life is fast. You just blink and it just goes by. I'm going to be 61 in July. It's mind numbing to me how quickly things have gone. And especially when I look at my kids and grandkids, the saying is days go slow, years go fast. And so if you don't have intentionality with your business as far as what is the greater purpose of it besides generating income for you personally and your family, then what I think that does is it opens up real strategic opportunities to look at it differently. And I think that that's really one of the things that I'll evaluate often. To your specific point is when I'm having a conversation with somebody, I try to figure out how often they're working in their business, working versus working on their business. If they're not taking time out to think strategically about their business, and whether this is in the context of faith or not, then you know that that business, that enterprise, is always going to be limited in how successful it is.
Yeah, no, it definitely has that aspect. They said that they tell a joke. A guy, had a certain business dealing, and a guy, he maybe owed a guy money, but he wasn't sure or whatever, and he, so he wasn't sure what he, how he should proceed. Does he mention it? Does he not mention it? So he came to his friend. He said, do I owe this guy money? Do I not? And he said, well, here's the question. Does that guy pray? He goes, I don't know. Does he pray? He says, I don't think so. He goes, then don't worry about it, because he's not going to really remember, right? Because when else do we think about right in the middle of prayer, it's like, oh, that guy owes me money, and that guy, that's usually our time. So within your mentoring, you'll obviously bring in the professional, and you also bring in the personal. Have you found that people take to that, or they've been burned by their, I don't know, some earlier experience they've had in life? It's like, no, that's not for me. Like, what's kind of been your experience?
Well, so I think that, look, you and I run in, when you're in business, you're generally dealing with people that are a little more intellectual, right? They're bright people. And one of the things that in a conversation, generally, if someone's not going to orient toward God, it's because they don't believe the Bible is true, right? They're going to nitpick something. They found out in their history of discord with people of faith that if they use that argument of, well, there's a bunch of errors in the Bible, then that gives them an easy out, because most people that are trying to talk about faith don't know the Bible well enough to actually have a back and forth, right? And defend their position. Apologetics is a big thing. You have to be able to defend your faith. And one of the things that I quickly pivot to is by asking the question of, well, Rami, have you read the Bible? And I've never had anybody say, yes, I've read it cover to cover, right? I'll ask the question, have you read the Bible? And most everybody says, well, no. They'll try to weasel out that they make it sound like they've read more of it than they have, but most of them have. They start in Genesis, and by
Leviticus, they're finished. They're finished by Leviticus if they make it
right. By the time they get to Noah and the ark, and after that, they're like, well, there's nothing really more interesting, and they just stop, right? So when I ask them, have you read the Bible, and they fundamentally say no, then I just simply say, I'm confused. And nobody wants to be talking to someone who's confused. And they go, well, what are you confused about? And I'm like, well, I'm confused because you seem like a really bright person, and you're educated, and you probably read and have read a lot in your life. And here's the most published book in the history of mankind, and you haven't read it. I'm confused. And from there, this person is faced with this pretty challenging juxtaposition, right? It's like, how can they have an opinion about something they really haven't read, right? And so at least we're being honest with what their approach to God and something bigger than them, and that is, if God went to the effort to write this book, don't you think you should at least read it, right? And so from there, I'm talking dozens and dozens over the years of people that going through that challenge. Now, not some people they're not interested. Okay, I'm not going to pressure someone into that, but there's a lot of people that actually that conversation I had with them, Rami, believe it or not, is the first time, whether this person is 25 years old or 60 years old, it's the first time anybody's literally challenged them to, hey man, why don't you just read it? And so there's a lot of people that have done that. And then, then it's up to God. I mean, God works through them and draws them and opens things up. But it all started with, and this gets back to, I think, an important dynamic of what you do is through your podcast and your subjects is you are not just challenging, but you're encouraging business owners to be more intentional with their faith. And this is intentional with their employees, with their clients, with their suppliers, everybody they interact with. And if you think about it, all of us touch a lot more people Monday through Friday than we do on a Saturday or Sunday, right? And so if we're more intentional with what we believe in the workplace, there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain out there, and a lot of it, whether it's associated with business or just other issues, people are looking for answers. And what better person to help them navigate and answer some questions than someone who has had a level of success in business? So, it's there's a buddy of mine. This is, when we were in Wall Street days, and he would always remind me of, David Rockefeller knew when it was time to exit stocks when his shoe shine guy was giving him advice on individual stocks, right? So he's like, man, this guy's giving me stock tips. We're at the high. I need to get out. And so I think that, opening up dialogue from the business side with people is refreshing. And I think because there's a lot of people that if they're having a challenge in life, regardless of what it is, right? Business issues, marital issues, kids issues with their kids. I'm sorry, there's a lot of people, their natural bent is, well, you know what? I think I'm just going to go to synagogue, or I think I'm just going to go to church. That's not what their natural thing is to do. They want to have a conversation. And if we make it obvious to people that we are an open door for them to have that conversation with, I think people will walk through it a lot more than we believe they will.
Yeah. A podcaster that I often listen to, he says, we have these neon signs for the exit. He said, what we really need to do is have more points of entry. We need to have more places that a person could enter. One of the podcasts that I did, we're actually releasing it very soon. These are a bunch of guys that they have a ministry where they have, I think it's called, it's a pint, what is it? It's a pint, a passage, and a prayer. And they go out to different places and kind of bring ministry out to different places that it's out there, and it's not always tucked away inside the church or the synagogue where we like to find it. Shifting a little bit more towards business, because we could definitely talk about religion for a lot longer. But you're doing some interesting work with the White House, right? So you want to just tell us a little bit about that, because I think it just kind of colored the entire business that you're working on currently. And so, yeah.
So I was originally a board member, now the CEO of Virtual HQ. And so we build 3D environments. So if you just think about what Zuckerberg tried to do with the metaverse that failed, mainly because, he made it look like a cartoon. And frankly, I think people are turning over yet another aspect of their life to one of the big tech companies. So 3D environments are the future on a lot of things, just because it allows immersion, right? You enter into 3D world, and it just allows much more interaction than just going to a website or looking at something on YouTube. Because the challenge is that, if you're looking up something, you click open a tab, and then you open another tab, and you click another link, and next thing you know, you're 6 links away or clicks away from what you were looking at, and then your kids are screaming, what time's dinner? And you just kind of got lost. Whereas a 3D environment, it's immersive. All the information is contained in right at your fingertips, and you're there. So that's what we do. We made a presentation to the Trump administration because next year, July, is the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So we know that Trump signed an executive order to have a massive celebration in a bunch of locations, a bunch of different events, just really highlighting how far America's come and how far it can still go. And when we presented to them that we could take all these different activities and events they're doing and wrap a 3D environment, an immersive environment for people to come to, they loved it. And so, we're in negotiation right now as far as how it's going to budget and how we can build it and so forth. But a simple example, we showed them we could create an exact replica of the White House lawn and the Oval Office. And one of the ideas I had is we could make a replica of the Lincoln bedroom and actually have Abraham Lincoln, an avatar, an AI generated avatar, just standing right there, and you could walk in, you could just ask him any question, literally have a conversation with Abraham Lincoln. And so they love that, because from the education side, this is how kids are learning now. And so if the White House can be at the point of the spear of everything great going on in America and what more great things can happen, and we can be part of that, we're very excited about it. So, as they say, it's a long way from the cup to the lip. So, when you're dealing something that big, there's a lot of negotiation, but we're very optimistic. We got a text this morning that we're moving in the right direction. And so that's a big initiative, is continuing building the 3D environments. And then our second standalone product, which we just went to beta last week, is something called Secure Call. And it will be the world's first 100% secure, completely autonomous ephemeral communication platform. So we're doing a video conference right here. You're recording this, obviously, because it's a podcast. But everybody knows that you get on, whether we're using this platform or any of the other ones that have become a verb now. I mean, Zoom is a verb. Let's do a Zoom, right? They aren't as secure as people think they are. And you look at everything going on with the debacle with the White House and Department of Defense and the whole Signal and what they're calling Signal Gate. Everybody thought Signal was end-to-end encrypted, and it is, but it's also highly penetrable. Whereas our platform, Secure Call, it'll be the most secure ever, and it's really it's a phenomenal platform that we went to beta in. So we're excited about that as well. There's a lot of different applications that can be used inside a 3D environment, but also as a standalone product.
All right. Wow. I think there's also, if you're going to be doing programs, and I'm sure you guys are probably not going to be doing the educational content, but there's so much biblical writing. I mean, Deuteronomy was quoted in every one of the founding fathers of the United States, quoted that nonstop. So, they certainly were all founded on biblical principles. They were, their intention, I very much believe, was freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. And that has been something that unfortunately has been used kind of against the system to say, no, separation of church and state really was there to protect that the state shouldn't be able to do anything to the church, but didn't mean that the church has no role, and that the government is primary to the church. It was really, no, the church should be primary, or synagogue, right, should be primary in our lives, and the government, takes care of building the roads and kind of doing the, taking out the garbage and stuff.
Yeah, it's funny, and again, this is where history revision or just history erasing. I mean, the whole term separation of church and state was a letter from Thomas Jefferson to someone in the state of Connecticut, where they're talking about this issue of faith, and it was exactly what you're saying. It's not that the church that the government stays out of the church and vice versa. It's like that the government isn't supposed to be telling the church what to do, right? And so that's where he was talking about it, and it's been easy fodder for the people that are not faith oriented to cause frustration with that. And I think that, to your point about Leviticus, I mean, these are the things that I think about. We could create a 3D environment, right, where we create an avatar, create Moses, looks just like what we would think Moses would look like. And you could have any of the founding fathers and have the two of them having conversation back and forth about the inspiration they got from the Bible, what Moses was thinking, because it's all about data, right? I mean, this is one of my frustrating things about this. Everybody's talking about AI, right? And ChatGPT. I'm sorry, all ChatGPT is just a hypersonic Google search, right? It's nothing. There's nothing. It's creating new. It's just doing this really extensive search faster, right? But to your point about education is that we could create these environments where the student or anybody can just ask questions and have dialogue with the actual producers of that knowledge, right? And that is the beautiful thing about AI. In the White House, one of the things they said to us when we were talking about this is like, look, we can get you access to all the information in the Smithsonian, right? So we're getting accurate, specific information. So the messaging, whatever question is asked, there's going to be an accurate answer come out. So I think there's a lot of fun thing that can be done. And I think people will be, to your point, they'll be surprised at how much our laws, but also a lot of our business acumen come from the Bible, specifically from Leviticus, and what Moses was trying to explain to the Israelites. This is how things are going to function. And they're going to be successful because this is God's heart. This is what God wants to do. He's not setting you up for failure.
Yeah, there's so much there, and I think that is one of the challenges of how do you bring it into schools where kids are exposed to it without I think a certain amount of sensitivity, meaning I don't know that I would want my kids to be in a Christian school, and you probably wouldn't want your kids to be in a Jewish school, so how do you do that where the curriculum is kind of like wholesome and God is part of the conversation, maybe, or the specific religion or religious observance is slightly different, but yeah, definitely having God within our lives, and that there is this sense of higher being, and it's not just the state. And if I can get away with it, God is watching. They tell a story, and we'll start wrapping up. But there was this rabbi, Rabbi Chafetz Chaim. So he was one of the real holy rabbis, and he's on a wagon, and the wagon driver turns to him and he says, "Listen, I'm just going to jump over the fence. I'm going to take a couple of apples, and I'm going to get on and we're going to ride. If you see the owner of the field, please just yell out, that then I'll know." So the guy, kind of tiptoes, hops over the fence, and he starts yelling, "He sees." And he runs out, runs back on, and he's flying, he's driving away. He goes, "Wow, you must have eagle eyes. How did you? I didn't see anyone around." He goes, "No, he sees. He sees.
Yeah.
Not the field owner, but yeah. In the end of the day, that's how we have to conduct our lives, always, whether it's in the church or synagogue or outside in business, and every aspect is having that sense of he sees, not in a crushing way, but in a wow, look, I can live up to this and step up."
Yeah, well, look, it's this is how we started our conversation today, is that when we punch the clock at 8:00 on in the beginning of the week, I would say Monday, but you start yours a day earlier, that we just kind of go and we forget about God. Now, so put this in the context of our marriage, right? If we refused to tell our spouse, we come home at the end of the day, and they say, "How was your day?" And we say, "You know what? It's none of your business." And our spouse will be like, "Wait a minute, no, you can't silo your life, right?" But think about how often we do that with God, specifically in the aspect of business. We can't silo off that portion. That doesn't make sense. That's not how relationships work. We wouldn't do it with our spouse. So why would we do that with our Creator? That doesn't make sense to me.
That is a great parable, and with that we will end. Rob, thank you so much. This was really just great having this conversation. Hopefully, we'll get to meet in person in a couple of weeks in Dallas.
Well, I think your platform's awesome, and what you're doing is great. So Godspeed. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Amen.